I was supposed to be out of town that weekend. That's what Jessica thought anyway. A work trip, some stupid conference 3 states over. I had my bags packed, my flight booked. But then my boss called, plans changed, trip canceled. I didn't text her. I don't know why. Maybe a part of me wanted to surprise her. Maybe a part of me already knew. I drove home late, past midnight. The street was quiet, the kind of eerie silence that makes your stomach twist. My house, our house, stood there like it always did, lights off, curtains drawn. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought she was asleep. But I did know better, didn't I? The first thing that felt off was the car in the driveway. A car I recognized. A car that shouldn't have been there. My brother's car. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he stopped by. Maybe he needed something. But at midnight? When he lived an hour away? No. The explanation was already there. Lodged in the back of my skull like a bullet I refused to acknowledge. I didn't want to believe it. Even when I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Even when I saw the shoes carelessly tossed by the entrance. Men's shoes, his shoes. I still clung to that last thread of denial. Then I heard it. Laughter. Low voices. Hers. His. I moved without thinking. Down the hall. Past the framed wedding photos I suddenly wanted to rip off the walls. The bedroom door was slightly open. Just enough. Pushed it. There she was. Tangled up in my brother. Half covered by our sheets. My sheets. And you know what she did? She didn't gasp. She didn't scramble. She didn't even look guilty. She just turned her head, met my eyes and smiled. Like she had one. I didn't feel anger first. Not even shock. Just stillness. A deep, unnatural stillness. Like my brain refused to process what I was looking at. Jessica, my wife, lay there, stretched across our bed like this was just another lazy Sunday morning. And my brother, Matt, sat beside her, propped up on one elbow, staring at me with the same wide-eyed expression of a kid caught stealing cookies. I could hear everything. The faint hum of the ceiling fan. The rustle of sheets as Jessica shifted, tilting her head like she was bored already. The creak of the floorboard beneath my feet. My own heartbeat, heavy and slow like it belonged to someone else. Neither of them spoke first. That honor belonged to me. What the hell is this? My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was too calm. Too flat. Jessica sighed. Sighed. Like I had just asked her to explain why she forgot to take the trash out. Well, she said, sitting up, not even bothering to cover herself, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Matt finally moved, scrambling to pull the sheet up around his waist like that was gonna make a damn difference. Look, man, you what? I cut him off, taking a step into the room. He flinched. Good. He should be afraid. Jessica, on the other hand, just rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be so dramatic. You weren't even supposed to be here. I blinked. Excuse me. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, looking at me like I was the one being unreasonable. I mean, if you had just gone on your stupid trip like you were supposed to, none of this would even be happening right now. I swear to God, I actually laughed. A short, humorless sound that tasted like bile in my throat. So, let me get this straight. You're blaming me for catching you screwing my brother in our bed. Jessica shrugged. Shrugged. Well, yeah. If you think about it, this is kind of your fault. Matt opened his mouth, probably to say something equally pathetic, but I didn't give him the chance. My whole body felt hot, like fire was crawling under my skin, but my voice stayed ice cold. Get out. Jessica frowned. What? You heard me? I said, stepping back. Both of you. Get out of my house. Matt, the coward, was already scrambling for his clothes, hopping on one foot as he shoved his legs into his jeans. But Jessica? She didn't move. She just sat there, lips pressed together like she was considering her options. Then she smirked. No, I swear. For a second, I thought I misheard her. No. She stood up, completely unbothered, and took a step toward me. This is our house, sweetheart. You really think you can just kick me out? My hands clenched into fists. I own this house. My name's on the mortgage. Not yours. Her smile widened. And we're married, genius. You really want to play this game? You throw me out, I call a lawyer. Maybe I take half. Maybe I take more. Maybe I make your life a living hell just because I can. I could hear the challenge in her voice. The arrogance. The absolute certainty that no matter what I did, she would win. And maybe she was right. Maybe legally, financially, she could make this messy. But at that moment, I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I turned on my heel and walked out. Out of the bedroom. Out of the house. Out into the night air that suddenly felt suffocating. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I needed to think, to breathe, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. Because one thing was crystal clear, Jessica wasn't done playing games. And this was only the beginning. I drove aimlessly for hours, the glow of streetlights smearing against the windshield like a bad dream. My phone buzzed repeatedly, calls, texts, but I didn't look. I already knew who it was. Jessica wasn't the type to let things lie. She probably wanted to gloat, to twist the knife a little deeper. Maybe she thought I'd beg. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Eventually, I pulled into an all-night diner on the edge of town. The kind of place with sticky booths and the smell of burnt coffee soaked into the walls. I sat in the corner, ordered something I didn't touch, and just existed for a while. That's when my phone buzzed again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something made me answer. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was fate. I put the phone to my ear. Yeah? Silence. Then a hesitant voice. Ethan? I frowned. Who is this? A pause. Then it's Lily. I stiffened. Lily. Jessica's best friend. The same Lily who had always been too nice, too awkward, too out of place next to someone like Jessica. We'd never talked much outside of group settings, so for her to be calling me now? Something was off. I leaned back, rubbing a hand over my face. What do you want? She hesitated, then lowered her voice. I need to talk to you. In person. Now? Yes. Please. I should have said no. Should have told her to text me whatever she had to say and left it at that. But there was something in her voice, urgency, maybe even guilt. And after the night I'd had, I wasn't in the mood for more mysteries. Fine, I muttered. Where? 20 minutes later, I was parked outside an apartment complex across town. Lily was already outside, pacing under a street lamp, her arms crossed tight over her chest. The moment she saw me, she hurried over, glancing around like she was afraid of being seen. I barely had time to step out before she grabbed my wrist, eyes wide. You don't know the half of it. I frowned. The half of what? She let go, taking a shaky breath. Jessica, what she's been doing. Ethan. This wasn't a one-time thing. Something in my stomach twisted. I hadn't let myself think too much about it yet. I figured it had been going on for a while. Matt and Jessica didn't look like two people who had just made a one-time mistake. But hearing it confirmed, that was different. I clenched my jaw. How long? Lily hesitated. Over a year. I exhaled slowly. You knew. She flinched but didn't look away. Not at first. But when I did find out, I tried to tell her to stop, I really did. She just laughed and said it was none of my business. I studied her, searching for any sign of dishonesty, but all I saw was guilt. Then something clicked. I narrowed my eyes. Wait, you said what she's been doing. Not just Matt. Lily swallowed hard. A cold weight settled in my chest. Who else? She looked down, shaking her head. I don't know all of them. But Matt isn't the first. And he won't be the last. I stood there, staring at her as the last remnants of denial crumbled. Jessica wasn't just cheating. She was a serial cheater. She'd been lying to me for years. I should have felt rage, hatred, maybe even betrayal. But all I felt was done. Done with the lies. Done with the mind games. Done with her. Lily looked up at me, voice barely above a whisper. What are you going to do? I took a breath, my decision already made. Burn her whole world to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The reality of it was too big, too suffocating. Jessica, my wife, the woman I had built a life with, hadn't just betrayed me. She had never been loyal. Not once. Every memory I had with her felt tainted now. Every moment I had thought we were happy. Every time I had trusted her. Every stupid time I had told myself she was the one. All of it was a lie. And the worst part? She didn't even respect me enough to hide it properly. She thought I was so weak, so stupid, that she could parade around behind my back without consequence. That was going to change. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. I wasn't just going to leave her. That would be too easy. Jessica needed to lose. She needed to feel the weight of everything she had done. And most importantly, she needed to know that I was the one who destroyed her. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I had no idea if she was serious about trying to take half, but I wasn't taking any chances. By noon, I had a meeting set up with one of the best divorce attorneys in town. A guy who specialized in nasty breakups. Ironclad prenup or not, I wanted this done right. Next, I started making calls. Jessica had built her image carefully. Friends, family, work colleagues, all of them thought she was this perfect, charming, put-together woman. I was about to shatter that illusion. I started with our mutual friends. Casual conversations at first, but it didn't take long to steer things in the right direction. Did you hear about Jessica? No? Well, you're not going to believe this. Then I went to her workplace. Jessica loved her job, loved playing the role of the competent, professional businesswoman. But the thing about corporate jobs? They really don't like scandals. And thanks to Lily, I knew she had been seeing at least one of her coworkers. I didn't go in making accusations. That would have been too obvious. No, I was smart about it. An anonymous email, a few well-placed rumors, just enough to plant the seed. Let her deal with the fallout. Then came my family. I had already written off Matt. I had no brother anymore. But my parents? They needed to hear this from me, not from Jessica's twisted version of events. I drove straight to their house, barely even remembering the trip. My mother answered the door, smiling at first until she saw my face. Ethan? She stepped aside, worried. What's wrong? I walked past her, straight into the living room where my father sat with his coffee and morning paper. He looked up, confused. I didn't ease into it. I just said it. Matt's been sleeping with Jessica. My mother gasped. My father set his coffee down with deliberate slowness. Then, silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. My mother looked like she was about to cry. My father, though? He just sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I knew that boy would ruin this family one day, he muttered. I blinked. Excuse me. He looked up at me, tired but unsurprised. Matt's always been reckless. Selfish. He's never had to deal with real consequences. My mother shook her head. But with Jessica? Ethan's wife. I clenched my jaw. Not just Matt. She's been cheating for years. He's just the latest in a long list. Another silence. Then my father sighed again. What do you need from us? I wasn't expecting that. I had braced myself for excuses for some pathetic attempt to defend Matt. But they didn't. I exhaled slowly. I need you to cut him off. My mother flinched. Ethan, no, I met her gaze, voice steady. He made his choice. If you want to keep him in your life, that's your decision. But if you do, I'm gone. For good. She looked devastated. But she didn't argue. And that was all I needed. I left after that, ignoring the dozen texts from Matt that had started flooding in. He must have figured out I had told them. Good. Let him panic. Let him burn. There was only one thing left to do now, go home and face Jessica. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew she was waiting. She was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, leg bouncing. She must have heard the rumors already because she looked pissed. The second she saw me, she shot to her feet. What the hell have you been saying about me? I smiled. Just a little. Just enough to make her nervous. Sit down, Jessica. Her mouth opened, probably to argue, but something in my tone stopped her. For the first time, she actually looked worried. Good. It was time to end this. Jessica didn't sit. Of course, she didn't. She was too busy seething, pacing the living room in her little designer heels, arms crossed tight over her chest like she was the victim here. What the hell did you do, Ethan? She snapped, turning to glare at me. I shut the door behind me, taking my time as I stepped forward. What do you mean? I asked, voice calm. Too calm. Jessica scoffed. Oh, don't play dumb. I've been getting calls all day. My boss wants to speak with me first thing in the morning. Half my friends won't even text me back. And Matt, she cut herself off, realizing her mistake a second too late. I tilted my head. Go on. What about Matt? Her lips pressed into a thin line. You know what? You ran to mommy and daddy, didn't you? Boo-hoo, per Ethan, my brother stole my wife. She rolled her eyes. God, you're pathetic. I chuckled. Actually chuckled. Because she still thought she had the upper hand. I took another step forward. I didn't just talk to my parents, Jessica. I talked to everyone. Her eyes narrowed. What the hell does that mean? It means that by now most of your friends know exactly who you are. Your boss? Probably has questions about that little office fling you thought no one noticed. And my parents? Let's just say Matt won't be getting any more free passes. For the first time I saw it. A flicker of something behind her eyes. Not guilt. Not regret. Fear. Good. She scoffed again, but it wasn't as sharp this time. So what? You think ruining my reputation is going to fix your little ego? Newsflash, Ethan, it's not my fault you weren't enough for me. That one almost got to me. Almost? I took a slow breath. You're right, I said, watching her smirk. It's not your fault. Her head tilted, confused. It's mine, I continued. Forever believing you were worth my time. The smirk dropped. I pulled a folder from my jacket and tossed it onto the coffee table between us. She eyed it warily. What's this? Divorce papers, I said simply. Her eyebrows shot up. Oh, please. She waved a dismissive hand, but I caught the way her fingers twitched. You're not divorcing me, Ethan. I laughed. A real laugh this time. Oh, I'm not. Jessica crossed her arms again, but her stance wasn't as strong as before. No, you're not. Because that would mean letting me win. I shook my head, smiling. Jessica, you lost the second you let my brother into our bed. For the first time, she had no comeback. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough. You're done, Jess. You spent years lying, cheating, playing your little games. But you forgot one thing. She swallowed. What? I smiled. I can play too. Silence stretched between us. Then she laughed. A full, manic, unhinged laugh. She threw her head back like this was the funniest thing she'd ever heard, then wiped at her eyes. Oh, Ethan, she said, shaking her head. You really think this is over? I held her gaze. It is for me. She stopped laughing. Just stood there, breathing a little too fast, jaw clenched a little too tight. Then she stepped forward, pressing a finger to my chest. You think you're walking away clean. But you don't know anything, Ethan. Not really. I didn't flinch. Then why don't you enlighten me? She smirked again, but it didn't reach her eyes. You'll see, she whispered. Soon enough. A challenge. Promise. But she had already lost. Because for the first time in years, I felt free. Jessica didn't sign the papers. Of course, she didn't. That would have been too easy. Instead, she did exactly what I should have expected. She started a war. The next morning, I woke up to a notification from my bank. A large withdrawal. I frowned, checking the details. Jessica. She had taken money out of our joint account. A lot of money. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't unexpected. Jessica was predictable in her pettiness. She wasn't going to just let me leave without making it as painful as possible. But she was sloppy, stupid, and she had just made her first mistake. I immediately called my lawyer. Freeze the account, I said as soon as he picked up. He sighed. I was just about to call you. I assume you saw. Saw what? A pause. Then, check your email. I hung up and pulled it up on my phone. There, sitting in my inbox, was an email from Jessica. Subject, since you want to play dirty. I opened it. Ethan, you want a divorce? Fine. But don't think for a second that you're walking away with everything. You want to turn my friends against me? Embarrass me? Make me the villain? Well, congratulations. You've won that round. But let's see how much you like it when I start playing back. I'm taking the house. I'm taking half of everything. And if you push me, I'll take more. You think I don't know things about you? You think I can't make your life hell? Watch me. Jessica, I stared at the screen, barely blinking. Not out of shock. Not even out of anger. Just disappointment. Because this was the best she could do? Threats, tantrums, and desperation? I closed the email and called my lawyer back. She wants a war, I said. Let's give her one. The next few weeks were a storm. Jessica tried everything. She stalled, she played games, she even tried to spin the narrative like I was the bad guy. She told mutual friends I had been emotionally abusive, laughable, that I had neglected her, sure, because working hard to give her the perfect life was neglect, and my personal favorite, she tried to hint that I had been the one cheating. I barely had to do anything to counter her lies. People weren't stupid. They had seen her behavior for years. They had heard the rumors before I even confirmed them. And the best part? Matt, being the spineless idiot he was already cracking under pressure. A friend of mine, Mark, called me one night. Dude, he said, barely holding back laughter. You're not gonna believe this. I just saw Matt at a bar, drunk off his ass, crying about how Jessica ruined his life. I raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah. Apparently, she's been cold to him lately. Mark snorted. Guess he thought screwing his brother's wife would lead to some kind of fairy tale romance. And now that it's all blowing up, he can't handle it. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. Pathetic. Jessica was using him just like she had used me. And now that the walls were closing in, she was already looking for her next move. But I wasn't done yet. I was waiting for the perfect moment. And it came 3 weeks later. I got a call from my lawyer. We have her, he said. I smiled. Tell me everything. He explained it simply. Jessica had been stupid enough to hide assets. She had taken money, lied about it, and left a paper trail. She thought she was clever, but in reality, she had just given me exactly what I needed. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. It was legal fraud, which meant I suddenly had a lot more leverage. That night, I went home calm, ready. Jessica was waiting, arms crossed, smirking. Changed your mind yet? She taunted. I smiled. Yeah, actually. I tossed a folder onto the table. I think you will. She frowned, opening it. The second her eyes scanned the page, her smirk vanished. I leaned in. You messed up, Jess. And now? You're losing everything. For the first time in weeks, she had nothing to say. And damn, it was satisfying. Jessica just stood there, staring at the papers like she could somehow will them out of existence. Her fingers gripped the edges so tightly that they started to crumple, but I didn't care. Let her panic. I crossed my arms, watching her. What's wrong, Jess? You look a little pale. She snapped her head up, eyes burning. This is bullshit. I chuckled. Is it? Because according to the law, what you did is called asset concealment. And do you know what happens when you get caught doing that in a divorce? Jessica's jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. I took a slow step forward. It means the judge isn't going to take your side, sweetheart. It means you don't get the house. You don't get half. Hell, you're lucky if you walk away with anything. She exhaled sharply through her nose, nostrils flaring. You wouldn't do this to me. I raised an eyebrow. You did this to yourself. Jessica's hands curled into fists. I will ruin you, Ethan. I leaned in just a little, just enough to see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. You already tried, I said, voice low. And look how that turned out. Silence stretched between us, thick and electric. Then, in a move so predictable it was almost laughable, she changed tactics. Her whole body language shifted, shoulders relaxing, voice softening. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something calculated. She sighed, shaking her head. Ethan, come on. This has gone too far. She gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. I know things got ugly, but do you really want to do this? We don't have to fight. I smirked. You mean you don't want to fight now that you're losing? She hesitated just for a second. Then she stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on my arm. We were good together once, weren't we? Her voice was soft now, almost nostalgic. I don't want to hurt you, baby. I almost laughed in her face. The audacity. But I played along, tilting my head. You don't. She bit her lip, looking up at me through her lashes. Of course not. I still care about you, Ethan. Her fingers traced small, meaningless circles against my skin. Maybe we can work something out. And there it was, the final move in Jessica's playbook. When manipulation, lies, and threats didn't work, seduction was her last weapon. Once upon a time, it would have worked. Not anymore. I slowly reached up, grabbing her wrist. She gasped slightly, probably thinking I was about to give in. Instead, I pulled her hand off me and stepped back. No, Jessica, I said, smiling. You don't get to work something out. Her face twisted, like she couldn't decide whether to be angry or embarrassed. I turned and started walking toward the door. Oh, and by the way, I tossed over my shoulder. Matt's been calling my parents nonstop, begging them to talk to me. I glanced back just in time to see the flicker of confusion cross her face. Guess he figured out you were never planning to stick around. Jessica stiffened, but I didn't wait for a response. I opened the door, stepped outside, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. I had one. And Jessica? She was finally out of my life. The funny thing about winning? It's never clean. I walked away from Jessica that night, knowing I had shattered her world. But people like her? They don't just fade quietly into the background. They claw, they grasp, they scheme because they can't accept defeat. And I was right. It started small. Annoying, but predictable. She refused to leave the house, claiming she had nowhere to go. She tried playing the victim, telling everyone I had forced her into a bad situation. She even tried guilt-tripping my parents, spinning some ridiculous sob story about how I had tricked her into a bad legal position. Didn't work. Then came the texts. At first, they were just pathetic attempts to talk. Ethan, let's be civil about this. We don't have to fight. I never wanted things to end like this. When I didn't respond, she got nastier. You're a spiteful little man. You always have been. I wasted my best years on you. You'll regret this. Mark my words. Still ignored her. Then, she got desperate. One night, around 2 a.m., my phone started ringing. Over and over. I finally answered, half asleep. What? I snapped. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then a sniffle. Ethan? Her voice was small, weak, like she had been crying. I don't know what to do. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Jessica. I made a mistake. Her voice cracked, and if I hadn't known better, I would have thought it was real. I messed up so bad, Ethan. I cut her off. What do you want? She hesitated. Then, can I come over? I actually laughed. Are you out of your mind? More silence. Then her voice turned ice cold. You don't have to be such an asshole, Ethan. I shook my head. Good night, Jessica. I hung up and blocked her number. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, I got another phone call. But this time, it wasn't from Jessica. It was from Matt. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. I picked up, putting it on speaker. What do you want? There was a pause. Then his voice strained, panicked. Ethan, you need to help me. I sat up a little. Help him? After everything? I almost hung up right there. But something in his voice made me stop. I sighed. Why the hell would I help you? She's ruining my life. I frowned. Who? Jessica, he breathed. She's lost it, man. She's been calling my job, making up crazy stories about me. She's talking to my ex, trying to dig up dirt. And now? She's saying she's going to. He cut himself off. I leaned forward. She's going to what, Matt? He hesitated. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear him, he whispered. She said she's going to tell everyone she's pregnant. For a second, I thought I misheard. She's what? She says it's mine, Matt rushed on, voice frantic. But dude, I know she's lying. She's just doing this to screw with me. God, I don't know what to do. I pinched the bridge of my nose. This was insanity. But at the same time, I wasn't surprised. Jessica was backed into a corner. And when people like her are desperate, they start swinging blindly. I exhaled. Matt, let me make something very clear to you. He went silent. I continued, voice firm. You made your choice when you screwed my wife. Whatever happens now, that's your problem, not mine. Ethan, please, he begged. You don't understand, she's telling my boss that she's pregnant with my kid. She's saying if I don't do the right thing, she's going to. I cut him off. That sounds like a you problem. He made a frustrated noise. Ethan, I know I screwed up, okay? But you have to help me. No, Matt, I said calmly. I really don't. Then, just to twist the knife, I added, maybe you should have thought about this before you crawled into bed with my wife. I hung up. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because karma had finally come knocking, the fallout came faster than I expected. Jessica wasn't just unraveling, she was imploding, dragging everything and everyone down with her. The fake pregnancy stunt? That was just the beginning. The very next morning, I got another call. This time, it wasn't from Matt. It was from my mother. Ethan. Her voice was tight. You need to come over. Now. I frowned, already bracing myself. What happened? It's about Jessica. Of course it was. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Mom, she showed up at our house. I froze. What? She came banging on the door at 7 in the morning. Screaming about you. About Matt. About everything. Your father had to physically remove her from the porch. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. Is she still there? No, she left. My mother hesitated. But Ethan, she was unhinged. She kept saying you ruined her life. That you set her up. Then she started going off about Matt. How he betrayed her. How he's just as pathetic as you are. I let out a humorless laugh. Guess the honeymoon phase didn't last. This isn't funny, my mother snapped. She's losing it. I think she's dangerous. That part didn't surprise me. Jessica had always been manipulative, but she had never been outright reckless. Now, she was spiraling. I exhaled. All right, I'll handle it. Ethan. Her voice softened. Please be careful. I didn't go to Jessica's place. I didn't need to, because later that afternoon, she came to me. I was sitting in my office at home, trying to get some actual work done, when I heard the slamming on the front door. Not knocking. Slamming. I sighed, already knowing who it was. I took my time getting up. Walked to the door. Opened it. Jessica stood there, wild. Hair mess, mascara smudged, breathing heavy. Her eyes darted past me into the house like she expected to see someone inside. She looked feral. I raised an eyebrow. Jessica. She shoved past me. I let her. She stomped into the living room, spinning to face me. Where is she? I blinked. What? She sneered. Oh, don't play dumb, Ethan. I know you've been seeing someone. I almost laughed. Unbelievable. Jessica, I said, voice low. Get out. She ignored me, pacing back and forth, muttering to herself. You think you're so smart. You think you won, don't you? I folded my arms. I did win. Her head snapped up. Her expression twisted into something ugly. You are such a loser, she hissed. You think you're better than me? You think you're above all this? She gestured wildly around the room like the walls themselves held all the answers. You're pathetic, Ethan. You always have been. I sighed, shaking my head. Jessica. Leave. She stepped closer. Too close. Her voice dropped into something venomous. You're going to be alone forever, you know that? I stared at her, unimpressed. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, come on. What woman would ever want you? You're boring. You're predictable. And now? You're just some bitter, washed-up divorcee. She smirked. Guess that makes two of us, huh? That should have stung. Should have. But it didn't. Because for the first time in years I saw her clearly. Jessica wasn't powerful. She wasn't special. She was just a sad, desperate woman who had finally run out of people to manipulate. I took a slow step forward. Jessica. She stiffened. I smiled. You don't matter to me anymore. Her eyes widened. I kept going. You can scream. You can cry. You can play all the little games you want. But at the end of the day, I shrugged. You're just a bad memory. Jessica's mouth opened. Closed. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. Because I knew this was the last time I would ever see her. Jessica was gone. For good. And I should have felt relief. I should have been celebrating, taking a deep breath, maybe even raising a glass to the fact that the nightmare was finally over. But instead, I just felt done. Not angry. Not sad. Just empty. It wasn't a bad kind of empty, though. It was the kind that comes after a storm when everything is still and quiet. When the wreckage is still there, but the worst is past. The next few weeks were strangely uneventful. Jessica went radio silent. No calls, no texts, no more psychotic outbursts. Maybe she finally got it through her head that I wasn't playing her game anymore. Maybe she was off ruining someone else's life. I didn't care. The divorce moved forward quickly, thanks to the massive legal leverage I had over her. In the end, she walked away with almost nothing. She lost the house. She lost the money she tried to hide. She lost me. And Matt? He was still trying to pick up the pieces. I ran into him once, weeks later. I was grabbing coffee at a small shop downtown, not really paying attention, when I heard someone say my name. I turned, and there he was, Matt. He looked awful. Hair a mess, eyes sunken in, like he hadn't slept in weeks. He hesitated, then gave me a small, pathetic smile. Hey, man. I just stared at him. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I know you don't want to see me, but I needed to say something. I waited. He swallowed hard. I screwed up. His voice cracked a little. I know I did. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I hate myself for what I did. I studied him. Once he was my brother. Once I would have done anything for him. But now, I didn't feel anything. No anger. No sadness. Just nothing. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Then I said, simply, okay. Matt flinched like he was expecting more. But there wasn't more. That was it. That was all I had for him. He nodded slowly, looking down at the ground. Yeah, okay. And then he walked away. I watched him go. And that was the moment I knew I was free. No more Jessica. No more Matt. No more looking back. Just me, finally stepping forward into something new. And I had never felt lighter in my life.